A graduate student at MSU once asked me if I would be willing to talk with his parents. He had tried coming out to them on his own, and it had not gone especially well. So I gave them an appointment, and the evening that I was supposed to meet with him and his parents, it became more of a committee meeting. The young man was there, his mother and father were there, but they also brought grandparents and siblings and cousins. I had a very large office in those days, but it was crowded. We ran out of chairs. And the conversation got hot very quickly. I tried in a pastoral and professorial way to talk about the biblical passages that they had felt made it impossible for them to accept their gay son. Our conversation was apparently the first time they'd ever encountered a biblically literate pastor who disagreed with their vehement prejudice against homosexuals. The conversation quickly became an argument. Grandma was on her feet shouting at her gay grandson, shaming him. His mother was red-faced and screaming to heaven for God to drive the demons out of me. Someone started speaking in tongues, and the whole thing started to look like the setting of an existential morality play. And you should not resort to this very often, men and women. I'm going to say this cautiously because this is not a place we need to go to often. But I will tell you this. One person armed with the truth becomes a majority. Sometimes you have to be that person. No matter how angry the crowd is, no matter how religious they take, sometimes you have to be that person. We need to be careful that we do not become blinded by the false certainty of arrogance. I know a lot of people who are very self-confident, who have no particular reason to be self-confident. We don't want to be that person. We don't want to allow our arrogance to get ahead of us. But when you know that you're right, it doesn't matter how many people in the room are calling you demonic or claiming a greater spirituality or a moral superiority. One person armed with the truth is the majority. Now, thankfully, in my 20 years of meeting with families to discuss their newly discovered gay family member, the tide has turned significantly. I still remember the day when there was still a movie theater at the Battlefield Mall. I went there with some friends to see the movie Philadelphia, in which Tom Hanks plays a young attorney who is fired from his law firm for being HIV positive or having AIDS. And after watching the scenes in that movie in which Tom Hanks' character was so beautifully supported, along with his partner, on Christmas Day, their families were so loving and attentive as this character slowly died. And walking out of the theater, I said to my friends, where is that family? At that time, it was 1993 when that movie was released, almost 20 years ago now. At that time, I had never met a family like that. Every family that I had to deal with as a pastor hated, rejected their gay children. And I wanted to see more like that Philadelphia movie. Parents used to wonder aloud, what did we do wrong? What did we do wrong that you turned out gay? I don't even know where that thinking comes from. Men and women, you don't do something wrong as a parent to have a gay child. What makes you do something wrong as a parent is to reject your own child. That's what makes you a bad parent. Thankfully, now being HIV positive does not result in a certain and quick death. It's also something to be thankful for that, in my experience, the loving, accepting family is now in the majority. I rarely have to encounter parents who do not accept their children. But there was a lot of anger, a lot of accusation, a lot of guilt, a lot of screaming, and even some speaking in tongues on our way to where we are today, when the President of the United States can openly state on national television that he believes that gay people should have equal rights in marriage. As with the end of the policy of Don't Ask, Don't Tell a couple of years ago, it seems to me that it's coming several years late. But I don't want to take anything away from the fact that this day has come. Getting the president to speak his mind does not change the minds of many people immediately. There's still a lot of work to be done, but you have to admit we're going in the right direction, and we're going to win. I had an argument with the president of MSU a few years ago when they refused to change their policy for their insurance to allow coverage for partners, and I said to him, we are going to win. You're going to lose this one. So you may as well get ahead of the curve. And he held on until he retired, and his replacement immediately changed the policy. We're going to win this one, and we're going to win it on every front. I was amazed when the president first made a statement. Fox News, of course, quite predictably started announcing that the president was launching a war on marriage. But one of their reporters, Shepard Smith, corrected that, and he said, President Obama is on the right side of history. And everyone else on that channel changed their tune immediately because he's on the right side of history. I still have the caveat that he's several years late, but he's on the right side of history. Martin Luther King Jr. said that the church should be society's headlights, but that most of the time we end up being the taillights. Women got the vote early in the 20th century, and this morning, in most of the 400 churches in Springfield, Missouri, women were not allowed to speak, to hold positions on the board, or leadership within the church. We integrated schools in America in the 1960s. 50 years ago. And churches are still the most segregated place on earth. The hour of worship on Sunday morning is still the most segregated hour in America. We gave women the right to control their own reproductive health in the 1970s. But religious groups have been trying to reclaim control of women's wombs and now their contraception ever since. The United Methodist Church, the second largest Protestant denomination in America, met this past week in their general conference in Florida and again voted down a motion to allow gays and lesbians to serve as pastors and to conduct same-sex marriages in their churches. I got to tell you, I went to Vanderbilt Seminary back in the late 70s and early 80s, which is near the Methodist World Center. There are lots of Methodist students, and almost all the Methodist pastors I knew were gay. I don't know what they're voting on right now, but if they think they can go to a big convention hall down in Florida and vote the gay away, they don't understand what human sexuality is all about. They will change. The United Methodist Church will change, as the Episcopal Church has, and the United Church of Christ, and the Disciples of Christ, and even the Lutherans have. But the Methodist Church isn't there yet, but they will get there. Unfortunately, they're going to get there when it's too late to stop an irreversible slide into complete moral irrelevance. The first century of the Common Era was a time when the church faced its first great moral crisis. And that moral crisis was a surprise that we heard read in our scripture passage today. A surprise on the part of Jewish Christians that Gentiles could be Christians. They seemed totally shocked by the notion. I don't take much of the Acts accounts to be literal history, but even if the story is entirely apocryphal, the fact that Luke wants to tell the story records what is the undisputed truth, that the early Jewish Christians found it inconceivable that God could want them to accept Gentiles into their Christian fellowship. There were Jews who wanted to kill Paul for just suggesting it, and Luke makes it seem that even the best and closest friends of Jesus, James and Peter, were shocked, almost beyond their ability to believe it, that the Holy Spirit was extended to Gentiles. Because, men and women, prejudice has its own logic. It doesn't make sense, but we live with it until we can somehow be liberated from the prison of judgment and moral condescension and anger and hatred. And then when you look back on it, you can't remember why you were prejudiced in the first place. I grew up in segregated schools, as many of you did, and I didn't even think about it at the time. I worked on farms all around the neighborhood where I grew up, and there were black and white people working in the farms together, and it never even occurred to me to wonder where they went to school, or to even notice that my school did not have black students in it. I didn't know anything about it. It just wasn't front of mind. Once schools were integrated, and I was in the 5th grade when it was, and that same year the public swimming pool in my little hometown was integrated. Our Little League baseball teams were integrated, and within a year I had so many new friends I could not imagine going back to the world where we had different schools and different places to be. And even though I went to a very progressive seminary, in 1978, Vanderbilt Divinity School appointed the first female dean of a divinity school in the world, Sally McFay. And shortly after becoming dean, she also let it be known that she was also the first lesbian dean of a divinity school in the world, which even there resulted in a fairly short tenure as dean. Even with lots of fellow gay students, though, when I was in graduate school, I never really processed the church's prejudice until long after I'd finished my doctorate and I'd come to Springfield. And the first church I served in Springfield, I inherited a homosexual associate pastor. And within the first month of arriving, it became obvious to me that I had board members that were ready to publicly humiliate him and fire him. And I had to make a decision. I had to either stand back and watch this man be crucified for no reason other than his sexual orientation, or I had to be able to convince an entire big church why they were wrong. It was not my progressive seminary professors who taught the prejudice out of me. It was mean people in church who taught me. Seeing how vicious they were willing to be is what forced me to look at an issue seriously and to speak out about it. And I'm a little bitter because I've taken a lot of beatings for that over the years, that it took President Obama 20 years to say what I was saying in 1991. I had to stand up to a church board and affirm my belief that gays were just like the rest of us, a blend of saint and sinner, and watch the backs of church members and big donors walk out. For the most part, the church has been dragged into the present, kicking and screaming, and regrettably, years after public institutions had already arrived at the same point. Ladies and gentlemen, Disneyland extended benefits to same-sex partners years ago. Disneyland is providing moral leadership that the church still hasn't caught on to. The church has often become the protector of the status quo rather than the proclaimers of social justice. But folks, we don't go to that church anymore. It was delayed, but I appreciate it. You don't have to be scared of me. I'm not going to hurt you. We're all on the same side here. We don't want to appoint ourselves as judges of other churches or other religions, but I'm going to draw this line in the sand. Genuine, legitimate spirituality brings people together. Sick, misleading, evil religion divides people. I think this is one of those Occam razors that we can declare, that we can borrow from Jesus. A tree is known by the fruit that it bears. And if you bring people together, that's good fruit. If you divide people and create a tiered society where white men are up here and men in general are here, and white women, and then homosexuals, and then transgendered people, if you create a gendered society, that's a bad apple. The tree that produces that fruit is evil. And you can do a lot of good things, but if you're still trying to create a tiered society, this is the whole issue of situational ethics. You cannot go down to Commercial Street and feed hungry children and then go down to Broad Street and shoot children and get known for feeding hungry children on Commercial Street. Situational ethics is not enough. It's not enough to do a few good things to offset the bad things. If you in the 21st century are still condemning people for the circumstances of their birth, whether that's the nation they were born in, the skin they were born into, or the sexual orientation that they were born into, that's sick, and it needs to stop. Any church that says that it is God's will for you to tier humanity, that's the entity that we call the devil. That's not the God that we worship. If your church says that you have to be male to preach, then I'm going to tell you that church has a fundamental misunderstanding of the role of genitalia in the writing and delivery of sermons. If your church, I know I'm embarrassed for me too. I just don't blush anymore. If the church says that straight people can get married in the sanctuary, but gay people can't, then no self-respecting straight person ought to get married in that sanctuary. And I wouldn't give them a dime of support as long as they defend their prejudice. But as I've said, that's the church we don't go to anymore. Today we celebrate with our gay members and friends that now our president's views have evolved. We pledge ourselves to work with you in making full equality not just an idea, but a reality in our time. Have courage. It does get better. Yeah.
You've been watching a progressive Christian video from the Community Christian Church of Springfield, Missouri. We encourage our viewers to donate to our efforts in feeding the homeless and hungry of our community. Write to us at reverenddray@aol.com for more information.